Tonight we're in Coventry, and welcome to Question Time. And good evening to you at home. Welcome to our audience here who are going to be putting questions to our panel, who, as ever, do not know those questions till they hear them from our audience. Our panel: the Conservative Employment Minister, Esther McVey; Labour's Shadow Energy Secretary, Caroline Flint; the man who's spearheading next year's Liberal Democrat general election campaign, Paddy Ashdown; the SNP's Humza Yousaf; the Scottish Government's External Affairs Minister; and the Daily Telegraph blogger, Tim Stanley. Good, thank you very much. And our first question from Bahram Hashemi, please.
Should Gary Barlow hand back his OBE?
Should Gary Barlow hand back his OBE? They take that singer with a huge amount of tax avoidance, apparently, which has got to be paid back. Should he also hand back his OBE? Humza Yousaf.
That's a good question, Bahram. I have to say that, Gary Barlow's OBE, frankly, I don't care about the OBE. What he should be returning is that £20 million that he's avoided to pay. Look, Bahram, I'm going to get a ribbing for this back home, but I have to confess, my guilty pleasure, I'm quite a Take That fan. I've got the albums back home. But let me tell you why this issue is significant for two reasons. First of all, we've got a UK government that tells us the reason for their austerity cuts, for their cuts that are hitting the disabled and the poorest in our society, that they are because they don't have a penny in the budget. And they say that while there's £35 billion of tax that hasn't been collected. How can you have no money and yet have £35 billion of tax not collected by the government because HMRC and the government can't get their act together? And the second thing, and the second point to make on this issue, is what has characterised the UK government over the last 4 years, is how it treats the wealthiest in society versus the poorest in society. I tell you what, if you had a dispute with HMRC, Bahram, you would have HMRC sending you letters, you'd have the government sending you notices, you'd probably have them knocking on your very door. The disabled and the poorest being relentlessly pursued to get them back into work. In Scotland, we had a blind diabetic, Henry Sherlock, who was being bullied and harassed to get into work.
But we're moving rather far away, with great respect. We're moving rather far away from the tax avoidance.
But if you're wealthy and avoiding tax and a millionaire, you don't get so much a slap in the wrist, you don't even get a tickle. And that's the hypocrisy of this thing.
All right. Esther McVey.
Well, the flaw in that logic there is the fact that we are going after millionaires to get the money to make sure they pay the tax, and celebrities to make sure they pay their tax. So there is a flaw there. More than ever before, this government is making sure that people are paying their tax and they're not avoiding the tax. And it is only fair and right that each and every one of us here pays our tax bill, because that tax bill enables us to have the NHS we want, to have the schools we want, to have the transport we want, to have everything that is right in a good, solid community and country. So it is right we go after that. It is important that we go after that money. But his OBE, and that was the question by Bahram, should he hand back his OBE? No, I don't think he should. That was for so much charity work that he's done, so much that he's done for the music industry. So that is separate. And if I had the offer of an OBE or £63 million and I was the government, I would be taking back the £63 million.
Yes, the woman up there in the striped shirt.
Esther McVey says that they're going after millionaires and celebrities, but I'd like to know, are they also going after corporations that avoid their massive tax bills?
Yeah.
And
Okay. No. Let's stick with Mr. Barlow just for a moment. You, sir, with the.
I think it's a bit rich for the Conservatives to say they're going after tax money. George Osborne didn't come into politics to take money off rich people. He's doing it because we're telling him to. Jimmy Carr got abuse for his tax affairs, and yet yesterday in Parliament, David Cameron made a joke about Gary Barlow. Gary Barlow shouldn't give back his OBE. We should take it back from him.
No, No, hold on, we'll come back to the time. Caroline Flint.
Well, the gentleman is quite right, because when Jimmy Carr was in the spotlight, David Cameron said it was morally wrong what happened there. But when it's come to Gary Barlow, he's taken a different tack. And it seems to me that probably everyone here and people watching this programme, most of us, you know, pay as we earn, basically. We pay our tax, and what we haven't got is access to accountants and other people who can find a way for us to hide our money. Like Hamza, I'm not that interested about the OBE, although a word to the wise, it might be worth checking out people's tax situation before we award one. But what I do think is Gary Barlow and the many others like him should not only pay that tax back, but where it's proven, pay penalties as well. But Esther, it's again a bit rich.
Sorry, hang on a second. Just you said something quite serious. They should pay penalties.
What I'm saying...
Let's just be absolutely clear. As I understand it, tax avoidance schemes by people who are not on PAYE have to be registered with the HMRC, and then they decide whether to accept a scheme. So there's not a criminal offence. Why should you pay a penalty?
What I'm saying is where if these things are found wrong and they're found to be beyond what HMRC are saying, they should pay penalties as well. But I think people are fed up of seeing very wealthy people, and corporations as well, getting out of their tax obligations. And the fact is, Esther, your government, David Cameron, decided to give a tax cut to people earning over £150,000 a year, even though you wanted to harm people through the bedroom tax.
All right, a brief answer to that. Just briefly, if you would, because we've
to point out the factual inaccuracies there, we've tightened the rules, we're getting more in than ever before, and we've increased the penalties because we all know that that money should come back to the British public. So factually inaccurate there, Caroline.
Okay. You said in the middle there.
Well, I agree with I do agree your point you were making about the top rate of tax. I think that it comes down to the question of an optimal rate, and if it is set too high, it does deter rich people away.
Yes.
And I think that there has to be a certain level where the top rate of tax is set, otherwise, obviously, rich people do move abroad. And I think...
What do you think about the Gary Barlow case?
I think that he should handle the money back, but I think he should keep his OBE on the grounds of how much he has done for the UK in terms of charity work and obviously services to the music industry as well.
He's done nothing illegal, has he?
No, exactly.
No.
If I earn £63 million per annum and I could afford to pay accountants to help me not pay as much tax as I possibly could, even earning £40,000 a year, if I could afford to get someone to do that and save me money, which is money in my pocket, I would do it, and I'm sure 90% of this audience would.
Paddy Ashdown, do you want to pick up on that point?
I want to pick up on the point that Esther made, which I think is the right one. He received his OBE for other things, and I think the case for that stands. So should it be removed? No. Should he pay the penalty for the steps he's taken to avoid taxation? Yes, and that's where we should concentrate. So, as a straight answer, that's my view. Let me take up Hamza, because Hamza's point, as usual, parts company with fact and reality. The government has disastrously, bloodily cut the deficit. It's the poor that have paid the price for it. No, Hamza, it's not. As a result, in particular, but not exclusively, of the work done by the Liberal Democrats, 25 million people have had £800 less in taxation every year. 2.7 million have been, of the lowest paid, have been taken out of tax altogether. There is now 2.5 million being paid to the families of the poorest pupils in pupil premium to help them with education. The pensioners in this country are now getting £600 more in their pension annually than they ever got under Labour. Quite the contrary. What we have seen is the deficit cut by a third already and by a half by next year, while the economy is now growing faster than it's ever been before, and there's 1.3 million new jobs being created and 1.5 million apprentices.
And tax avoidance is an issue?
Well, no, look, the tax avoidance, well, I hoped I'd answer that first. But tax avoidance is a very big issue, but it's true to say that this government is now pursuing that with more resources than any previous government has done. Every government wants to tackle tax avoidance. Of course it's a big issue. Of course anybody who avoids taxes should be pursued. It's not an easy issue, but the government is now devoting resources to that at a larger scale than we have seen before. But the central point is this, that the tough action the government has taken has cut the deficit, has begun to repair the economy that was trashed by Labour, while at the same time getting the economy to grow by 1.7%, and probably more than that by the time the election came, and 1.3 million new jobs. That's not a bad record, and it's not on the backs of the poor.
Tim Stanley. Gary Barlow.
Gary Barlow. Someone said to me a couple of days ago, should Gary Barlow give his OBE back? And I replied, Gary Barlow has an OBE? Fortunately, it's not just for services to music industry, because that would be an irony too far. It is also for his charitable work. Gary Barlow is not a bad man. He's done a tremendous amount for his country, for which he should be applauded, and he was rightly rewarded. If the allegations are true, he has taken advantage of something that's perfectly legal. Now, we might not be comfortable with it. We might not be comfortable with it, and that's understandable. And some people may even be quite angry with it, given how much money he does make.
Some people here are applauding when you said it.
Some people are applauding. But he's done something perfectly legal. Now, when a tax system is incredibly complex or incredibly avaricious, then that encourages people to take advantage of such loopholes and to move their money overseas. Loopholes, incidentally, which previous governments have actually encouraged in order to get rich people to stay here. If the tax system were simpler, and if taxes were a little bit lower, then those people would be more inclined to obey the rules totally as they are, not move anything overseas, and do the right thing. So if we bring taxes down, as it has to be said, this government has done for certain tax bands, not for me, but for some tax bands, you actually find that income goes up. So let's lower it, simplify it, and this sort of thing won't happen.
All right. Let's... We'll go on to another question. I should just say you can, of course, join in this debate, as you well know, by text or by Twitter. Our hashtag BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time. You can text comments to 83981. The red button is the one to push if you want to see what other people are saying. Elizabeth Kimberley, please. Elizabeth Kimberley.
Is Michael Gove an ideologically obsessed zealot, and should he be reined in over his free schools policy?
These were... These were quotes attributed to Liberal Democrat sources this week over a row over funding free schools at the expense of other schools. Extensive quotes about him acting in a way that was nothing short of lunacy. Caroline Flint, do you agree with ideologically obsessed zealot who should be reined in?
Well, there are 22,000 schools, state schools, of which free schools represent less than 1%. I wish there was more discussion about the 22,000 rather than around 200 free schools. I think we should get that into context. But what we've seen in the last week is a situation where we've had Michael Gove and Nick Clegg at each other's throats over education policy. Nick Clegg has his free school meals policy, which apparently the funding for that wasn't worked out, and that was being trashed by the Tories. On the other hand, on the free schools, we now find out there's an 800 million black hole in which they've had to raid money from primary schools to fill the gap.
You're in favour of free schools?
Yeah.
What I'm in...
Are you in favour of schools?
What I'm going to say is this. I am in favour of academies, and what we have said, that if we win the next general election, we'll have 3 tests in place. One is that schools should be in areas of need, and one of the problems with free schools is 2/3 of them are secondary based, and that does not help primary schools, and they're not in the right place to help the need for primary school places. Secondly, we need to have oversight, so we deal with some of the problems that have emerged through some of these free schools. And thirdly, we believe that actually you should have qualified teachers in all schools, or people working towards qualification. And the problem is in the last week what we've seen, and I can't quite work it out, whether it's just Liberal Democrats and Tories trying to differentiate themselves because there's an election next week, or whether it's just incompetence. I feel it's a bit of both.
Paddy Ashdown, what do you make of these Liberal Democrats accusing Michael Gove of
I think there's been some pretty
being ideologically obsessed?
I think there's been some pretty hot-headed language on both sides. It's not my style of politics, and I don't agree with either with some of the more colourful adjectives used by either side. By the way, not the politicians concerned, but some of their supporting staff. They're always the ones who can let loose a bit, and the press will pick it up. I don't think that's the issue, frankly. I mean, if some officials want to use some overheated language, well, fine, let them do so.
Is there a rift, is the issue, isn't it?
No, I think there's a rift, certainly not over school meals, and certainly not over the principal preschool meals. By the way, from September you'll get that, and I think it's a very significant advance. I don't say every school will be in a position to deliver from September, but about 90 to 95% will, and I think that's a very significant move, and I'm very proud it's the Liberal Democrats who have led it, with the support of the Conservatives, very clearly expressed. Now, on the issue of free schools, I'm glad that Caroline Flint has told us that the Labour Party is in favour of free schools, because there's been a good deal of doubt about this as they've shilly-shallied backwards and forwards in the last year. But they've come clean, and I'm delighted by that. I am too, because I think it offers choice. To me, who delivers is not as important as what is the standard of the education that is delivered, provided it is of universal access, so free for all to go to, paid for from taxation, and subject to proper inspection and quality control. Those are the three concerns that I have. Now, what worries me about the free schools is not the principle. I'm in favour of that, but in the way that it has been enacted. Let me give you a fact that we are now facing a very serious pressure on school places. There are some local authorities who will not this year be able to provide their statutory duties to parents to provide places for their children. And at that time, to take £400 million out of the funds for basic needs and put it into try and fill an £800 million black hole in the free school budget seems to me to be wrong. And we have said so. And I think it's right that we should. The job of the Liberal Democrats in this government is to hold people to account when they move in directions that we think are not fair. Now, I agree with free schools, but the way that this has been enacted so far, the shift of that money from where it is desperately needed to face a crisis to fill a black hole in an area which is not, I think unbalances the system and gives it a bad reputation.
Paddy, but it's all very well you saying that, and we're in agreement on that. But the truth is the Liberal Democrats signed up to this policy, and with that they signed up to the budgets that were being set, and clearly the budgets weren't thought through, and that's why primary school money in the state sector is being raided right now. And there is not a single thing a Liberal Democrat MP or a member of the government sitting on those benches with the Conservative ministers can do about it.
I mean, forgive me, that is just wrong. First of all,
it's true. What are they going to do about it?
I was careful to check that you were, so you would have signed up to the policy too. So it's not the principle of the policy.
No.
Well, excuse me, you said you were in favour of free schools.
No, what I said
was,
this is about the budget. When
the principle of free schools, are you in favour of that or not?
When the policy was set up, it was about not endangering other funding for primary schools that weren't free schools. What has happened, as you quite rightly said, there is an £800 million black hole. 50% of underspend has gone to pay for it, and 50% is coming from the basic needs budget for primary schools. And I'm afraid Liberal Democrat ministers haven't been doing the job they should be doing.
But who identified this but Liberal Democrat ministers?
You've got David Walls in there.
We've heard yours. Esther McVey. Tories are accused of having taken this money out and left a black hole behind, and Michael Gove is accused of being ideologically obsessed. What do you say to an argument that comes from Paddy Ashdown as well as from Caroline Flint?
Ideologically obsessed, no, but actually driven and determined to make sure that we've got excellent education, I'd say yes. And Caroline, when you know Labour's record is that 1 in 3 kids left primary school unable to read, write and do maths, when you know that we actually fell down the OECD tables in maths, English and science, it's just not acceptable. What we want to do is make sure that all children from all backgrounds get the best possible education that we can have. And that is why he is driven, and that is why he's focused. This is a lad who was adopted, went to a comprehensive school, worked his way up to Oxford. So, of course, he is driven and focused, and he wants to make sure that everybody has that opportunity to succeed where they can. And free schools, well, 80% of them are built now and made in areas of economic deprivation, and 70% are in areas of absolute need, where parents, staff, teachers have come forward and said, we want to build these schools for our kids. So that is the reality. And actually, the money for new places at school has doubled. It's £5 billion. So wrong there. And I think we'd all agree we want to make sure our kids get the best education.
What about
something they weren't getting under Labour.
What about the 400 million that Paddy Ashdown referred to? that was, in his view, wrongly taken out of one budget and put in.
Well, it wasn't wrongly taken out of a budget. If people need the schools, if people want to support those schools, if parents and teachers are saying this is what we need in our area, they're the people who should have the say, and we need to do that. But remember, this is a protected budget,
for the primary
and it has
schools,
doubled for new school places by £5 billion.
Let's hear from some members of our audience. You, sir, in the second row there.
But the main parties aren't actually listening to parents. 207,000 people put in a protest to the government to change a policy that was introduced in September last year. The main parties aren't listening to the adults that are making silly decisions about things and not even talking to us.
What was the policy that you had?
The school attendance policy was completely ignored by the department for the petition for the school attendance reversal.
And you, sir, at the very back, the spectacles. I just hear from several members of the audience, then we'll go on.
I think it's not so much the opportunity for parents to choose a school, it's the consequences of those schools choosing against the other schools. The 2,000 are getting more than the 22,000. And that opportunity cost.
150.
200, even worse.
74.
Right, OK. And over here, you, sir.
Yes, when you look at this, there's a fundamental contradiction. Local authorities are legally bound to provide school places, and at the same time they're banned from opening schools of their own. So you end up with schools with porta cabins on the car park or office blocks being converted, and that's not going to give us education, good universal education. OK, and you, sir, in the second row from the back there. That's you, yes?
Esther McVey just said about different illiteracy, numeracy problems, we're dropping down in the tables. That's with government intervention. Surely the government should butt out and let the teachers teach.
The sliding down of the league tables was what took place in the latter years of the Labour government. There's been a mild improvement since Gove took over. If Michael Gove is an ideologue, then I'll be honest, I'm a fanatical member of his barmy army. I think he's absolutely marvellous. If you take this case of free schools, the reason why so much money has to be diverted towards them is because they're so incredibly popular. Since the policy was started, about 300 have been set up, and there's now about 3 people trying to get one place. If you get into a free school, that school is twice as likely to end up being regarded as outstanding as a normal school is. So they're incredibly successful. You here in Coventry are going to get 2 new free schools, I believe, which are also faith schools, one Muslim, one Sikh. They will take 50% of people who are not from that faith. And you're very, very fortunate. Because the statistics constantly show that those schools quite often outperform the so-called normal schools. Now, the whole principle of Michael Gove's approach, is to hand power back to teachers and to parents.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's not about taking it away from them. It's about empowering them. That's the whole idea behind a free school, because the parents set it up.
Tim, you'll have to persuade the woman sitting here in the front who has been
very quickly, I've worked in it for 4 years. I'm leaving after 4 years. All it screams out to me is the man that's in control does not know what he's doing at all, because he's 90%.
Then why are so many parents joining? Why are so many parents setting them up?
Why do you say that?
Because I feel like he's making decisions and he doesn't know the profession. He doesn't understand the stresses and the pressures that we're under at all, because he hasn't ever worked in it. I don't understand how he's making decisions based on no experience whatsoever. No wonder they're going wrong.
Well, Jeremy Hunt is Minister for Health, but he's not a doctor. I mean, you run a ministry because you come into it with ideas and general experience when it comes to administration.
Yeah, have you seen what he's doing to the health service in England?
But he should be! He should be! That's why we're going wrong!
All right. I'll come to you in a second, because I know Scotland is in a very different position on this, but hear from you. But the woman there in the third row, yes, from the back.
Oh, hello.
It's over your head, yes.
Yes, I mean, I'd just like to pick up on that point because I think absolutely the problem is that Gove does not listen at all. He doesn't listen to teachers. He's constantly rubbishing teachers' and students' achievements. He doesn't listen to education experts. He tends to dismiss whatever education experts say if they disagree with him. He regards them as raving Marxists. And I also want to pick up on what Esther McVey was saying about testing and PISA testing. And recently, last week in The Guardian, there was a letter from a large group of academics, international academics, who were questioning, or it was a letter to the Director of Education for the OECD, saying, what is going on here? Why are these tests dominating education worldwide?
All right. Well, leaving aside letters to The Guardian for a moment, Esther McVey, do you want to answer the point that you first made?
Well,
about,
can I just finish? I haven't finished
no,
that
you've
point,
said
which...
quite a lot. No,
right.
About the Gove point, that he doesn't listen. That was your point, wasn't it?
Well, I know, and I've been out with him on tours, that he gets around the country. He meets with people, he meets with kids, he meets with parents, he meets with teachers.
Does it mean
and
he acts
all
on
of
it?
that is part of a listening exercise. And as I said, when you are trying to make sure you've got the, best schools and have, kids getting the best education, it is vital that you listen to everybody. And I'm sure, he would be disappointed if he were for you to think that way, because I do know that this is something that he's most passionate about and what he came into politics to do. He loves the subject and wants to help people. So if he thought you felt that way, maybe, he's got to do something about maybe how he's come across to you, but that isn't the case. The guy really does care.
To talk to me, I'd be very pleased to talk to you.
I could set up a date.
So it's a PR.
It looks like I could set up a date between the two of you then.
So it's a PR matter for Gove, really?
Well,
You think he needs a presentational improvement?
If people are thinking about this, because like I said, we have stopped the tumbling down the academic sort of tables. We've stopped that, and we're starting to go back up. So he's obviously got that bit
He's
right.
a democratically elected politician. He's there to change things. The people have put him there. Teachers are a special interest, a unionised special interest. They are resistant to change. That's entirely understandable.
Hamza, all right. Hamza.
I'm on the side of the man elected by the people to make change.
Let me just come in. When Tim said he was part of the Barmy Army, I think the Barmy Party is definitely the correct thing. But let me just say this, that I'm obviously an outside observer coming from Scotland. And in Scotland, we don't have free schools. We have education controlled by the Scottish Parliament and by the Scottish Government. And in this case, thank goodness for it. Caroline Flint got it absolutely correct in that these manufactured fights and arguments that they're having between the coalition are because there's a European election, of course, and a general election in 1 year's time. Now, let me just give you a Scottish perspective on that. The Scottish perspective is that since the Liberal Democrats leapt into bed with the Conservatives, they lost 2/3 of their seats in the Scottish Parliament. They lost over half their local council election seats, and by all projections, they're probably going to lose their single member of the European Parliament. My only plea to the audience here, because this is an English issue, my only plea to you, that I have seen from the outside what they've done with university education, charging students up to £9,000 a year, while in Scotland we've decided not to do that. My plea to you is do not allow them to create a two-tier system of education. Make sure you protect your children's education so that it is a right and not a privilege.
Okay.
I think it's all well and good to say about funding for schools. However, Catholic schools have to fund 10% themselves, and they're struggling to do this, which is affecting the education of children. What's going to be done about this?
All right, and take a point from you, sir, too.
But will Gove listen to parents?
Well, he hasn't listened to us, so
No.
what is he going to listen to
No.
parents?
He's already had people in the country screaming at him to change a policy.
You're saying the free school policy is not approved of by parents. Why do so many parents apparently queue up to go to the free schools?
Yeah, he's listened to one group of people, and he's listened to you, and he's agreed with the other group of people. That's how decision-making works.
You know, free schools represent less than 1% of our schools. Actually, what parents are concerned about, and I quite agree with Esther on this, that actually it is right that everyone has an access to a decent state school education. That's what parents want. But let's have some of the discussion about all those 22,000 schools rather than the obsession around 200 schools that are called free.
Paddy, briefly, if you would, and then we'll go on to
if you forgive me, I just want to correct Hamza's facts again. If the university student fees, student loans system is so bad, how can it be then, by the way, the student fees system that was introduced was more generous to students than the one under the Labour Party, but how can it be that the number of students going to universities has not gone down, as everybody predicted, but has gone up? And how can it be, Hamza, that the number of students from the poorest families are much higher? Why did Nick Clegg apologise? Are much higher as a proportion in England than they are in Scotland. The system that you are claiming does not help the poor is actually ensuring that a higher proportion of poor students are going to English universities than are today going to Scottish ones. Doesn't sound to me like a...
Why did Nick Clegg apologise? Did he apologise because he was right? No, that'd be a first for a politician,
because the promise that was made before the election was a promise we should not have made. It's not an apology for the policy, it's an apology for making a promise that was not a promise that was appropriate within the economic circumstances at the time.
Your apology is not accepted.
I can understand that.
Let's go on. A question from Parmjit Duggar, please. Parmjit Duggar.
Can any possible good arise from the Prime Minister's visit to Scotland today?
Prime Minister off to Scotland today, obviously in the light of the referendum that's coming in September. Can it possibly do any good? Who'd like to start on this? Perhaps, Hamza, you should start on it.
Well, you said the right thing, David. He's obviously come to Scotland because of the referendum. You know, my only regret is that he's only up for 2 days. I wish it was 5 days. I would have paid for his accommodation, frankly, because every time David Cameron or a Tory grandee comes up to Scotland to say, well, you know what, the earth is going to swallow you up if you become independent, thunderbolts will come down from the sky, and, well, you won't get Doctor Who in the television, you know, all these kind of scare stories that they've come out with. Actually, we've seen time and time again, over the last 6 months especially, that the campaign to support independence, Yes campaign, has increased, and the support for the No campaign has begun to diminish. And look, it worries me greatly when I see the polls of the UK general election, because I don't want to have another Tory government. That's why I support independence, because I want to see in Scotland people get the government that they elect. How absurd is it that David Cameron's come to Scotland? He has one MP in his party, one MP in the entire country. Just to put that in perspective, as the old joke goes, if it wasn't so tragic, it would be funny, that there's more giant pandas in Edinburgh Zoo than there are Tory MPs in the entire country. Now, let me just finish on this point.
Hang on, just before you finish, what was the percentage of Scots who voted Conservative at the last general election?
I don't know the exact,
well, you ought to
I don't know the exact number, but I'll tell you what.
Do you not know the percentage?
No, I don't know the exact percentage in the
but
general
you're
election,
saying that
but
the Prime Minister has no right to go to Scotland because he didn't have any MPs.
No, I didn't say that. I actually said I would welcome him to come to Scotland for even longer, actually, is what I said. But look, I'm quite aware...
ironically, I think.
I'm quite aware that I'm speaking to an English audience about Scottish independence. Let me just put it like this to you. Whether you're here in Coventry or Manchester or Liverpool or Bradford, Newcastle, let's face it, it's like Vince Cable, Lord Ashdown's friend, said, London is a giant sucking machine draining the rest of the UK. The politics of the Westminster establishment is entirely prioritised by the needs of Zone 1 and Zone 2 in London and the south-east of England. So look, if you had the chance to get rid of a Westminster elite that is scandal-ridden, that is greed-obsessed and London-centric, I tell you what, I bet you'd take it in a heartbeat too.
Tim Stanley. Tim.
I think it's too long that the English have been locked out of the debate about the Union. And I'm pleased that we're going to finally be a part of it. And I'll tell you why. I think the Better Together campaign made a huge mistake. That's the people saying, let's stay together. They decided to focus on economics. And that turned into, essentially, economic blackmail. They went to the Scots and said, you know what, if you become independent, you'll starve. And that rightly offended the Scots, and I think is behind the increase in support for independence. What we've now got to do is return to what this debate should be about, which is about the emotional, cultural, political reasons for the Union. And as an English person who's proudly pro-union, I'd like to take this opportunity just to quickly say what they are. This is the most successful experiment in multiculturalism in history. For 300 years, it has made us wealthier, it has improved our culture, it has made us better, more tolerant people. And there are people across the globe who look at us and marvel at the wonders and the riches that we have. And it is so amazing to think of ourselves as a family, Northern Irish, Welsh, English, Scottish, very different, bickering as families always do, but united through wars, through depressions, through recessions, and coming out of it strong because we are brothers and sisters. Please, Scotland, I say this as an Englishman, I mean this so passionately, please don't leave us, we need you.
Well said. Well said. And so it was a good idea for the Prime Minister to go to Scotland?
Yes.
I do think it's a good idea because he is Prime Minister of the whole United
Kingdom. All right. The man there in the grey waistcoat, you, sir.
As a Scotsman living in England, I see this for both sides of the fence. But recently, in fact, I think it was yesterday, George Osborne was quoted as saying Alex Salmond was a bully, bullying people into a yes vote. Is George Osborne not as much a bully, bullying the Scots by saying they won't have a currency union if Scotland vote yes to independence?
One for you, Esther McVey.
Well, you think of this like 300 years together. It is like a long relationship. And sometimes when you've been in a relationship with somebody, you think, gosh, how are we going to keep us together? So sometimes you give warnings, sometimes you give cautious words, sometimes you whisper sweet nothings, just to make sure you stay together. So you will be saying things like, but can you afford this? Will you be able to do this? Look, this is the downside should you leave us. Now, I don't think that's bullying. I think that is somebody who cares about you saying there are all these things to think about because, you know, it might be an immediate...
So let her finish. Let her finish.
Hang on a sec. Hang on a sec. You know, you might be making your name on the back of this and SNP might be making their name on the back of this. But actually, this is a huge, huge history of people who've been together for a long time. And I do believe we're better together. Yes, our cultures are different and we've got lots of differences between us. But you know what? That's what makes us great together. So I would stay together. But I would also heed the warnings. And with obviously a name like McVey as well, I have, you know, relatives up there too, and I would heed the warnings, listen to how it could work together. But you know what we should listen to? In England, we need to know why we're rubbing up against each other. Why isn't it working so well at the moment? And there is time for us to listen and get that right as well. But don't go, let's get it sorted. Let's go to relate together or something.
I'll say it again, sometimes it is just better to divorce. There's no point continuing in a relationship that's not working. Let's get divorced and move on.
And the woman here on the right.
I'd like to know why people in England and Wales aren't getting a say on this. It's just for Scotland to vote, but the whole of the United Kingdom will be completely changed. So why doesn't everyone else get a say?
Paddy Ashdown, do you want to answer that?
Because that's the way these things, I'm afraid, are done, you know, when the Irish decided to separate. And by the way, Tim, it pains me, God, it pains me greatly to have to agree with a columnist of the Daily Telegraph. But I do...
Imagine how I feel right now.
Yeah, and enthusiastically, you said all the things I would wish to have said. But look, you know, if a part of a nation wishes to separate, that part of the nation takes the decision, not the nation as a whole. That's the historical principle. And you know, you may regret it, perhaps I do too, that we don't have a voice in this.
Does that apply to the Ukraine as well?
Well, in the part of the Ukraine, yes, it would, if there'd been a proper referendum, but there never has been. There's been a false referendum, indeed a contorted and distorted referendum, but we'll get on to that later. The gentleman at the back here, it seems to me, sir, you said if it isn't working, we should get a divorce. You know, there is no union I can think of in history, as Tim said, that has worked better than this for 200, 300, 400 years. Look, let's start off from this proposition. The Scots are a great nation. They're a nation in their own right. They have a fantastic, great individual national history. They have a national education system. They have a national system of law, different from ours and in some ways better than ours. So they are entitled to have this debate. And they should be treated with respect in having this debate. And they're entitled to make this choice. And those who argue that Scotland could not survive by itself are talking nonsense, in my view. The core of this argument isn't that Scotland can't do this, it is that we are better together. And what worries me most, Hamza, I've got to say to you, listening to you, this is a rhetoric that may suit Scotland if you're debating in Scotland, but I have to say to you, I cannot listen to your language without being worried about the infusion of hate that is in there. Hate of London, hate of this filthy elite, hate of the South, hate of what is it? It's the language of division. And the reality of it is that we have made a fantastic success in 400 years of Great Britain because we put our divisions aside and worked together. So the argument, it seems to me, I'm desperate for Scotland to say no to independence, because we will be stronger as a country, but I passionately believe that they will be too. And all of those great things that are Scottish make such a contribution to us that they will be lost to us. This would be a disaster. But whatever happens, Hamza, whatever happens, let us have a more civilised debate than the kind of argument you are using, rather than this dreadful argument of hate and division.
Not Lord Ashdown, actually, it's not hatred. You know, I have genuinely the greatest respect for Lord Ashdown and what he says, but it's not hatred and division. The reasons why...
your language without believing
No, please, I didn't interrupt you, but when you talked about the greatest economic union, I'm just telling you the stark reality on the ground. We have 85,000 people, majority of them with a disabled household, who've been hit by the bedroom tax. It's not better together for them. Immigrants are being told to go home by government-sponsored posters. It's not better together for them, Lord Ashdown. When it comes to pensioners who've been saving for 40 to 50 years to see their pensions decimated, it's not better together for them. Now, my point is this, is that all those decisions are made by a coalition government that we did not elect. And the problem with David Cameron coming to Scotland is he has the audacity to say, I'm going to debate Nigel Farage. That's somebody who doesn't have a single MP, and in Scotland, the UKIP have never saved a deposit, let alone have an elected member. But he won't debate with Alex Salmond, the democratically elected head of the Scottish Government. That is audacious, and that is absolutely unacceptable.
Well, I think the Prime Minister is entitled to visit Scotland because he is the Prime Minister. And I have to say, what Hamza and Alex Salmond would love is to make this debate all about Alex Salmond versus David Cameron, because that's what they want to do. And they want to have it as a debate about Scotland versus Westminster. But that isn't the issue here. The vote in September is for Scots to decide if they want to separate and leave the United Kingdom. That is the question on the table. And as Paddy has said and as Tim has said, I think we have, as a union, been very successful. And I'm very proud that it was a Labour government that saw through the devolution for Scotland and Wales. I think we can be relaxed and confident about the choices that Scotland might make that might be different to here in England or different to in Wales or Northern Ireland for that matter, but at the same time not lose sight of, yes, the cultural and the emotional links, but also the economic links that make us better together. And I don't think we should allow the SNP to let this debate be one about Alex Salmond versus David Cameron. That is not the issue. And what they cannot have is a situation where they want to promote Scotland leaving the United Kingdom and think there will not be any consequences, because it will be very different. And I hope when Scots come to think about this and think about all the issues, I really hope that they stay with us.
Okay. There are a number of hands up, and I'd just like to take 2 or 3 people before we take another question. You sit in the front here.
I just want to say that I'm pro-union, but I agree with Hamza there that this issue is so important that the leaders should debate with Alex Salmond. All of the party leaders should get together and debate, because it's really crucial for the future of my daughter and the UK that she's going to grow up in.
Okay. And you?
I agree with Paddy and Tim on pro-union. The trouble is, the Better Together campaign is symptomatic of what's wrong with British politics, a constant focus on negative campaigning.
Yeah.
You know, Labour's election broadcast recently was a good example of that. There's a constant moaning and groaning about what other people are doing instead of promoting the positive. And that's what the Better Together campaign should do.
Okay. And you, sir, up there.
That's a question for Humza. If you believe so passionately that Scotland should be independent, why, if you get independence, do you want to join the European Union?
Sure. Well, by your logic, with the greatest due respect in the world, sir, then the 28 countries of the European Union wouldn't be independent. They are. The difference is they have the choice. And with the European Union, that's a fantastic point, because we don't get our choice, our voice heard at the top table in the European Union. And I agree entirely with this lady. This is a debate between negative and positive, between hope and aspiration and cynicism on the other. Look, Scotland is a wealthy country. We could be the 14th wealthiest country in the world. We could create a fairer and more social just welfare system. We could get rid of the obscenity of nuclear Trident missiles on our soil and invest that money in public services. This is a debate about unlocking Scotland's future. We're not going to rip away from you. We're not going to separate and divorce. We're not going to take a chainsaw down to Carlisle and just drift off into the North Sea. This is not about kilts and flags and anthems. You know, it's not about any of that. It's about a positive Scottish, creating a system that will help the poorest, not at the expense of the poorest. And I believe that the Better Together campaign have been far too negative, and that's why they're hemorrhaging support.
The woman on the right there. You, yes.
It's not better together for us who have to pay for prescriptions and also have university fees that Scotland don't.
You don't pay.
So you think that Scotland should go its own way?
Well, if they do, hopefully it'll be for the better for the rest of us.
For England. And the man in the red pullover there.
I find it vaguely ironic that Tim and Paddy were talking about the great multicultural experiment. Tim wrote a column in the Telegraph a few days ago talking about the need for greater immigration control. But he's talking about the great multicultural experiment with Scottish people, so are we only to let people in if they come from the right country?
First of all, thank you for reading. I really do appreciate that. Although, obviously, I wish you hadn't now. No, what I'm talking there about is the need for control when it comes to immigration from the European Union. That's about a very specific debate. I mean, what we're discussing here quite often seems to be policy, and what Hamza's criticising is Tory party policy. That seems to me be an argument for voting Labour, not for leaving the Union. If you disagree with those policies, let's all change them, because, by the way, there are plenty of Yorkshire people and Cornish people who don't like the bedroom tax.
Exactly.
They're not seeking independence, they're seeking to change that policy. If you don't like a policy, let's change it as a country. Let's not split off just because we disagree with something that London happens to be doing.
I'll take a last point. Man in the check shirt there.
I agree with you, Caroline. You know, I'm not one of David Cameron's favourites, or he's not one of my favourites. But he is the UK Prime Minister who can go where he likes. One thing I'm pretty sure of, though, is that if Aberdeen and all its oil industry was south of the border, we wouldn't be having this discussion now. And Tim, wherever you're on, can we all have some?
OK, let's go on to another question. Emily McFadden, please. Emily McFadden.
The International Criminal Court has announced preliminary investigations into allegations of the UK's systematic abuse of Iraqis. To what extent should politicians be held accountable for the actions of our soldiers?
Yes, the first part of this, the ICC announcing preliminary investigations, is well known. The question is, to what extent should politicians be held accountable for the actions of our soldiers? Paddy Ashdown.
Well, they should be. If politicians give the orders which soldiers then carry out, then they absolutely should be. Let me just take the case of the ICC, if I can, and then see if I can illustrate it with a small story. The ICC, actually, it's not an examination. It's a preliminary examination, not an investigation. Secondly, there are robust systems in Britain for investigating these. There are a thing called the IHAT is now investigating, I think, 43 cases of individual soldiers who acted beyond the law set by politicians, of course. That's out of about 140,000. So the ICC is claiming to seek to investigate something which I think, first of all, the British government rejects happens, and secondly, it makes the case that it's already investigating these. However, we are signatories to the ICC. And we should observe and respect the ICC in its decisions. And it's in our interest to do so, not only legally, but also in terms of the interest of our country. Let me give you a little story, if I can, very briefly. In 1996, I was in the villages south of Suvareca in Kosovo when we were bombarded by the main battle units of the Serb army, Serb tanks and Serb heavy artillery. And you may imagine I was with Kosovar Albanians in the villages there. It was extremely unpleasant. On the following day, I went to see Milosevic, and I took with me the Geneva Convention. And I said to him, this that I witnessed yesterday was a clear breach of the Geneva Convention where it touches on the rights of treatment of innocent civilians by armed force, and you could be brought to The Hague for that. The next time I saw him was when I gave evidence in The Hague, in Milosevic's trial, for that day's work which I witnessed. Now, the fact that you've got a law that can bring a politician to justice for an egregious breach of international law, and its oldest version, the Geneva Convention, makes this a safer world. But here's the story which isn't known so often, which is that same day before I saw Milosevic, I went to speak to the Serb artillery commanders who'd bombarded us in those Albanian villages the day before. And what I discovered was that those artillery commanders were actually more frightened of being indicted by the Hague Tribunal than they were of being bombed by NATO. And I returned and I said to Tony Blair, have them indicted now. See, the fact is that if you have a court like this, if you have a system of international law like this, it not only delivers justice to those who are egregiously breach it after the event, it also controls the actions of tyrants and torturers and murderers during the course of the war. Okay. And that's why it's so important. And that's why, whatever our position in Britain, we've explained it fairly clearly, we should be adhering to the prescriptions of this court, because it's our legal duty to do so, and it's in our interest to do so as well.
I'd just like to say that I think it's a little bit rich and very sick that politicians continually avoid these sorts of trials and blames when, you know, we have Tony Blair that started sending our young men to war, young men that, by the way, are trained to be aggressive, are trained to view the enemy in a certain way, and young men who volunteer their own lives for the good of our country. And you know, when these people make mistakes, as everyone does in all walks of life, you know, these men are singled out and ridiculed in the media and quite often sent to military prison. They lose their pension, the benefits and everything else. Meanwhile, the politicians just get away scot-free, and we seem to be chasing wars in countries, and this debate has been had before, but, you know, where there's all sorts of oil and everything else, and then, you know, when hundreds of schoolgirls in Nigeria get kidnapped, you know, where are our forces there? Surely we can just go in and get them back.
Let's come back. You mentioned Tony Blair. Caroline Flint, you're a great supporter of Tony Blair's. What is your view of what he's just said?
Well, my view on the International Criminal Court is that we're absolutely right to be signatories to it. And part of the task of the International Criminal Court is where there is evidence of systematic abuse and where countries that are run by dictatorships do not have a legal system to bring individuals, whether they are politicians, army commanders or whomever, to account. That's where the International Court can step in. And I think that is absolutely right. And clearly, if we had a situation in this country where we weren't following up on allegations of misuse, torture, rape or whatever, then quite rightly the ICC would step in and take action. But as Paddy said, we do have a system of legal proceedings in this country, thank goodness, that will follow these issues up and follow them through, and that's absolutely right.
So why is it necessary for the ICC to carry out any kind of investigation? And is it, as some people say, rather shaming to find Britain's name among a list of nations we wouldn't want to be associated with?
And there are so many nations where dictatorships exist and all sorts of horrific crimes.
Let Caroline answer the point.
Because it's perfectly right that if individuals, a group of lawyers or whoever, decide that they want to approach the ICC and ask them to look at a case, then that's quite right that should be done. And as Paddy said, that is exactly what's happening. An investigation hasn't started. They're looking into the complaint that has been made. And it may be that actually it won't get any further than this, because we do have proceedings in this country that can hold politicians and others to account, and there are cases underway at the moment. So we need to be clear about this. I respect and will stand up for the right for people to approach this court, just in the same way as I would stand up for the right of people to approach the European Court on human rights. But that does not mean that we should feel ashamed at this stage, because we should be proud of the fact we have a legal system that can actually bring people to task in this country.
OK, you said in the second row from the back.
We're quick enough to put our soldiers in the courts, but we're not quick enough to put our politicians in the courts in the same way. We're actually still waiting for the... Sorry, we're still waiting for the Chilcot report, some many, many years after Afghanistan and Iraq. But the one on the Falklands was completed in 6 months.
Yes.
Most of the information that we believe is still being held back by Tony Blair and Bush.
Tim Stanley.
And it has been suggested that certain politicians who shall not be named have not helped with that inquiry and have indeed helped to delay it.
Why can't they be named?
Well, I just don't want to get in trouble. On the philosophical point about who takes the most blame, soldiers or politicians, I was disgusted by those photos. Those soldiers should face disciplinary action for what happened. But politicians create the context within which that sort of thing happens. And those two men were under fire, and they had faced a terrible attack, which is the explanation that's been given for why they did what they did. Although it's no excuse, they should still face discipline. But politicians created the context, and the context is the Iraq War. Now, since that war began, 435 British service personnel have given their life. And for what? For the creation of a constitution that cannot guarantee the security of women and their rights, for opium production, which has reached the highest it has ever been, and now increasingly for negotiations with the Taliban, the very people we started the war in order to fight. I think it's sad that politicians can make such terrible decisions which cost lives and never ultimately face responsibility for it in the court of public opinion.
OK. I'm going to have to... Thank you. We've got only a minute left of this programme. Hamza, if you take half of it and Esther McVey the other half.
Well, I won't take long, because I agree entirely with what the gentleman at the front has been saying, that Tony Blair in particular, the purveyor of this war, the legal war in Iraq, has managed to get away with it scot-free. And look, the problem is in this country now, what we've done, a lot of good work that we've done internationally has been undermined by the fact that war has now become the first resort as opposed to the last resort. And, that is just completely the wrong way round. And in recent years, we've been in conflicts that we shouldn't have been in. If you want the ICC not to indict you, don't go into conflicts that we don't have to be in.
Esther McVey.
I think it was Admiral Lord West who said this, and I would agree with him. If anybody were captured around the world, the soldiers you'd hope that would have captured you would be the British soldiers, because they're fairer than anybody else, they're better than anybody else, and I'd say they go to the highest standards in the world. So, if anybody has done anything wrong, it is right for all of us to find that out and get it sorted out. But it is not systematic. It does not happen all the time. It'll be a rare exception, because we do have the best people in our army.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Time's up for this edition of Question Time. Now, next Thursday is election night. We've got the local and the European elections. And therefore, Question Time is going to come from the village of Radlett, which is near the BBC's Elstree studios in Hertfordshire, which is where we'll be presenting the election results later on that evening. So to that programme near Elstree, Chris Grayling for the Tories comes, Labour's Tristram Hunt, Jeremy Brown for the Liberal Democrats, and the television presenter Kirsty Allsop. And the week after that, we're going to be in a particularly spectacular place, which is the newly restored Terminal 2 at Heathrow Airport. You don't have to sort of take a flight as well. Nobody's yet trying to catch... There won't be people queuing in the background. We're at Terminal 2, which is a fabulous site. And so if you'd like to come either to Elstree or to Heathrow, you can apply on our website. It's probably the best way, the address on the screen there, or you can call us 0330 123 9988. If you're listening on 5 Live, the debate goes on, of course, on Question Time, Extra Time. Not here, however, so my thanks to our panel and to all of you who came here to Coventry to take part. Until next Thursday from Question Time, good night.
Yes, John Pienaar and Stephen Nolan continue the debate over on BBC Radio 5 Live now. Here on BBC One, This Week is next.